Hey, sports fans, welcome back. In case you're wondering, you are in the Zoom session for week 3, EDL 740, Graduate Research. Welcome back to you all. Those of you that came back, first I want to apologize to you. I succumbed last week to what I call Professor Pontification Syndrome. My apologies. I didn't do a very good job of beating back my talking tendencies. I love to hear myself talk as much as anybody, but I know that my answers, if I have any answers that are worthy for you all, it's only if they're in response to some questions that you have. In relation to that, if you have some questions, please post them in the chat box. And I don't know if you've noticed this or not, if any of you have ever gone back and watched Zoom sessions later for my class or other professors. It does a good job of capturing the video and audio of our conversations, but it does not record and capture what's going on in the chat box. So that's one of the reasons I ask you, if you'll put questions in the chat box, I'll get to them and I'll respond to them orally. That way we'll have a record of them in the Zoom session recording. Just a couple of housekeeping things, and then we'll talk about what you want to talk about. A reminder to you that we'll not have a Zoom session on week 7. You'll have a final exam instead, and now you already know what that looks like. And also a reminder to you all that your assignment deadlines are Sunday evenings at 11:30, except in week 7, in which case the deadline is Saturday evening at 11:30 p.m. Just a comment or two about the grading. I think you figured out by now that I'm not going to tell you what you've learned. I'm not even going to tell you what I think you ought to learn. That should be fairly obvious by the content I'm feeding to you. By the way, Dwyla, can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Anna, can you hear me? Someone give me a thumbs up. Okay. I just want to make sure. Thank you. On the grading piece, I am going to insist, however, and I keep in weeks 1 and 2, I've been poking at you a little bit. I'm going to insist that you provide evidence for me of deep critical analysis of the content, and that you articulate that learning in a clear and professional way. Pretend, I mentioned this last week, but pretend that I'm a neophyte and that I know nothing about the content that you're digesting. When you're posting your responses, give enough background and rationale to support your conclusions, so that a neophyte, someone that knows nothing about that content, would take away some understanding of what you're talking about. I'm reminded of, I love stand-up comedians. I love stand-up comedy. And one of my favorite comedians is Jim Gaffigan. And he does a piece about going to Waffle House. And he says, it's like they're not even trying. Well, I want you to try. Put some meat on them bones, please, when you're posting your responses. A comment, too, about the grading, just so you'll know I'm not picking on it, some of you. A lot of the times when I'm grading your stuff, I just mask the names completely. And I do the grading of just the responses. So I read an article a couple or 3 years ago by a professor that had come across some research that indicated that there is an inherent bias of teachers when they're grading based on the student, when they know the student whose work they're grading. And that professor didn't want to believe that, so he ran a pilot study on himself. And he found out that, yes, in fact, he did. He was biased in his grading based on the particular students and his knowledge of what they've done in the past and his history with them. And so he began the practice of doing the blind grading, and I found that to be a very interesting article. And so I about as often as not, when I'm grading your stuff, I'm doing it in a completely blind fashion, so that I don't let some kind of extraneous bias on my part sneak in on you. In week 1 and 2, I mentioned this to you last week. I'd love for every one of you to make an A. That would be my Christmas present. And so in week 1 and 2, I give you some gentle bumps and I let you try again. I want you to get it good and right. And so now I think as we move into week 3, you should all be familiar with the drill by now. I'll be a little more assertive in my responses to you. Some of you continue to dodge that least beneficial question, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. I'm going to make you rank. I'm going to force you to tell me the stuff that you find most valuable, and I'm going to force you to tell me the piece. It's not that it's not valuable. I hope I'm giving you content that's new and novel to you. That was redundant. But I want you to go through the cognitive process of ranking that stuff with regard to the value you take and the value you see in the content for your future. So I'm gonna keep poking at you when you do that. Monitor your email, your LSU email regularly, please. Almost all of my communications with you all are going to be through that medium. And the discussion forums, in most weeks there will just be two prompts, and most weeks they'll land on early Monday morning and early Tuesday morning, but that could vary. But just don't forget to monitor your LSU email, please. The collective learnings, I can see evidence that some of you are poking around in those. In fact, I forced you to poke around in one set of those last week. There's some pretty good information for you, not only for this course, but in other courses that you're maybe currently taking or may take in the future. One of the reasons I turn all this stuff back to you and I let you see what everybody else is saying and I let you see what everybody else is researching is because I've been to grad school. I doubt that any of you will ever take as many hours of graduate work as I have. I'm the ultimate slow learner in graduate school. But I know that you're going to be writing research papers and you have other professors asking you to write stuff and look for stuff. And I'm trying to help you by giving you a peek at all the research and the digging that your classmates are doing along with you in the process, and also through the discussion forums, and also by letting you take a look in those collective learnings. We got some really smart cookies in our group here, and we have such a broad range of professional endeavor. We have elementary, middle school, and high school. We have folks working at central office. We got Cricket she's in the communications business. With some of you in private schools, some in charter schools, some in faith-based campuses, and from different places in the United States. I don't think in this class we have someone on foreign soil. I missed it if we do. But usually we have someone in foreign lands that are part of our course, our professional learning community. The APA citations, you're getting better at it. And why would that be? Yeah, you're getting better at it, and I knew you would. Again, just remember to get the 4 parts there, always the 4 parts. The last name of the authors, last name, first initial of the author or authors, the human beings. A few of you have tried to get away with telling me the organization that published it or the production company. Put the name of the human beings, give those people credit. Part of it's about giving credit to people for their intellectual and cognitive work. The number two part of it is the year that stuff was created, not the year you looked at it. The third part of it is the title of the content. And the fourth part of it is finally, where would another curious person go to find it? If you're looking at it on a web link, then provide the URL address. If you're looking at it in hard copy, whether a book or a journal, then be very specific about who, if it's a book, who the publisher is, or if it's a journal, the name of the journal publication and the volume and the page numbers. Qualitative versus quantitative, you continue to get a steady diet of that. And I'll tell you this, you will continue to make new discoveries about the nuances of those two research tools, even 10, 15 years from now, if you keep your nose stuck in that stuff. We give kind of surface and superficial definitions of them, but they are like two sides of the same coin, and they have their own unique features. But there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of intertwine between those. On the TED Talk that you saw by Vaughn on asking better questions, that wasn't specifically related to research, but I wanted you all, I told you in week 1 that it's very important to me that we approach all of the content that we're covering from the perspective of being, you and I being leaders on school campuses. And so it's critical that you and I be able to ask questions that not only cut to the heart of issues, but also questions that stimulate thinking. And one of the unique things about working at schools is that you and I have the opportunity to work with a very well-educated cadre of people. Not every workplace is chock full of people with bachelor's and master's and sometimes doctoral degrees. And so it's very, in some respects, it's really nice because we can have very elevated conversations. In some cases, particularly from the leadership role, it's kind of challenging because all those smart people will make you squirm and wiggle a little bit. But one of the reasons I pitched that video to you is I was at a conference, probably 10 or 12 years ago. It's been a good while. And one of my colleagues and I were visiting about a friend of ours that had just retired from superintendent work. And we were talking about Bob and how much we love Bob and all that stuff. And my friend said, you know, the thing about Bob is I think he was the best listener I've ever known. And I thought, holy mackerel, what a tribute to a person to be described as a powerful listener. So I decided I was going to put becoming a better listener on my growth plan. And yes, I have a growth plan. If you want to see my growth plan, you can go to my website. But I post it there for you and God and everybody else in the university that wants to look at it. I modify it every June. But it's the things that I think I need to make Nelson better at in order to be a more effective leader and a better person. And so for about 3 or 4 years straight, on my growth plan, I had that one of my personal goals was to become a better and more powerful listener. So I began reading articles, watching videos, reading books, everything I could get my hands on listening. And as part of that process, it became apparent to me that if I was going to be a high quality listener, I had to up my game in my ability to ask good questions. And so that got added to my growth plan for a year or two as well. So I began reading books and consuming as much content as I could on how to become a better questioner. And I'll mention a book to you later on about that. But that TED Talk by Vaughn, I think, did a pretty good job of capturing in that 20-minute window the concept of how important it is for you and me to, especially in relation to our roles as leadership on school campuses, to be effective questioners. On Learning Task 2.6, the discussion forum, Caitlin commented in one of her responses about the impact of culture and climate on teacher productivity and effectiveness. And she alluded to the element of trust in that mix. And I could not agree more. I absolutely believe that trust is the precursor of followership, that people will do what you tell them to if you're the boss. People will do what you tell them to, usually, if you're in the room with them. But if they don't trust you, then they'll stop when you walk out the room. If you and I can, and I've been engaged in trying to build trust between you and myself from the very moment we started the class. And if I were working with you on a campus or in a school district, I would be engaged in the same sort of active steps to try to foster a high level of trust between you and myself. Because I know the best chance of you being open to what I'm saying and the best chance of you being willing to follow my lead is if you trust me. And going back to Caitlin's comments, and you all are living in this the milieu of school work, and some of you are living in very rich and healthy organizational environments, and some of you are living in some downright toxic environments. And I've been in both. I know how they feel. But think again like a school leader. A huge part of our work in leadership of schools is shaping the culture of the place. And I know you've taken other classes that address that more directly, but I'm convinced that you and I must be attentive every day, every hour of the impact that we're having on the culture of the place. Because that is really, more than anything else, the legacy that we'll leave once we move on to greener pastures, or we get fired, or in my case, you retire. By the way, on the element of climate, I mean, culture is that big amalgam of norms and values and beliefs and heroes and stories and stuff that groups of people assimilate. Climate, in my view, climate is just the manifestation of the culture. So when you walk into a building, you feel the manifestation of the culture of the place almost immediately, and you know what I'm talking about, I think. So you and I can have an impact on that by, in a lot of ways. Number one, the things we model, but also by the professional development that we choose to engage in with and for our colleagues in those environments, and with the kinds of people we hire, and the kinds of people we move out of the organization. In your research mining, learning tasks 4 and 5, I'm changing gears on you now. Quit preaching so much. In your research mining, you're coming across all kinds of testing instruments and scales and models and programs. And as researchers and research consumers, we're all grappling to find and craft better solutions for the students and schools we serve. Everybody's trying to build a better mousetrap. And the thing about it is, quality research provides evidence that can help us get there, so that it's not just shooting from the hip so much. Always we have to craft solutions that within the context in which we're working. It's very difficult to buy a package, although some of you do it, and there's no doubt in my mind some of you work for principals and superintendents who have laid down money for somebody else's program that's supposed to fix a particular problem, and it doesn't work. Been there and done that. The people that work on a campus are the ones that hold the keys to solutions to the problems. So as you and I, as leaders, if we can help nurture an environment of intellectual inquiry, so that the whole team is looking for quality evidence, research, that can help us craft solutions that meet the needs of our students on that campus at that moment in time, then we're all better off for it. There's some excellent questions on your proposal practice. Some of you got pretty good on your first shot at your question. Most of you will massage your questions and change them probably multiple times, as should be the case. Words do matter. If you launch out there and say something that you're going to study, and you're going to use a word like engagement or improvement or enhance or achievement, you're going to have to define those in relation to the study that you conceive. And you're going to have to figure out how to measure that stuff. So if you think you want to do a study in relation to student engagement, then you're going to have to tell your readers what engagement is and how you're going to measure it. And that's where most of the time in research, the devil is in the details. And it's very, if you craft a very broad and innocuous question, you're going to find extreme difficulty in trying to figure out tools to use in order to collect data that helps you get to that, some specific data, I mean. Also, in relation to your proposal practice, when I ask you to pitch the question, you'll increasingly understand that virtually everything has already been studied, and that's one of the reasons I pitch learning tasks 4 and 5 at you, is to give you a feel for the fact that there's a whole lot of bright minds all around this planet that are grappling with the same kinds of problems at schools that you and I are. And many of them have actually done some research on that can inform our practice if we actually stick our nose in the research and take a look at it. The proposal practice is you're tightening your questions, and it's a challenge, but you will tighten your question. There's no question. There's no doubt about it. I will say this, and several of you picked up on this from some of the content that I provided to you. You're not going to be happy if you try to start your research question with the stem of why. It's not going to be a manageable question for you. So if your current question starts with why, think carefully about how you might change the way that's phrased so that you can start with the word how or what in the stem of your question, of your research question. I think you'll be much happier with the downstream effects as you start looking at the specifics of how to frame the study, how to carry it off, how to actually collect some actionable data. Get rid of the why. On the research mining, I think it's beginning to sharpen your eye also for the structural components of research. Those of you that are looking at actual studies, you get to see the way that stuff is framed again and again. It's very formulaic in nature, and for a good reason, because it's a good formula. But it gives you a better sense, I think, of the challenges of pulling off a quality study. And you should be getting a better feel for what good research questions look like. I'm still on the topic of research mining. Some of you are discovering some theories of learning in that process, and we will address that specifically in week 7 of this course. We'll devote the whole week in week 7 to theories of learning and the research around that. In the research mining, a couple or 3 of you have come across the concept of transformational leadership. Perhaps the most prolific researcher on the topic of leadership in the last 50 years was Dr. Bernard Bass. Most of his work was done in the 1980s and 1990s. He still has proteges pumping out work even to this day. But Dr. Bass came up with what he called the full-scale model of leadership, and he was very instrumental in coining the phrase transformational leadership. And transformation is a word that we pitch around quite a lot in school business these days. But if you ever really want to get serious about studying leadership, I think you'll want to look into the books and articles written by Dr. Bernard Bass. The date of the study that you're looking at, the studies that you're looking at, can matter quite a lot. because technology and our interconnected world has turned education on its head, just like it's turned almost everything else on its head. You know, if you're sticking your nose in a study done in the 1970s or the study done in the 1980s, you'll have to think very carefully about its applicability in the education environment currently. Technology in particular, these technologies that you and I are using tonight, have really created quite a dynamic and interesting and in many ways challenging context in the realm of education. And those of you that work in those campuses with students right now, even elementary campuses, you know, it's rare that students don't have a digital device on their person almost every hour of every day. Some real challenges, but as I was watching my 4th grade granddaughter the other night learn the states in the United States using her iPhone and an application to help her learn those, man, that would be a lot more fun than when I did it and we had to take map colors out and color the states and then try to put the names by. Week 3. Now we're in 2 days into week 3, and we're moving into the qualitative, more specific conversations in the qualitative tools. As you've probably already figured out, and you'll get a bigger dose of it this week, it's the mushier side of research, much more inductive in nature. Typically, you're looking for the underlying stories and context around the phenomena, and not so much the quantitative trends and outliers. So it'll stretch you. And qualitative in particular, well, in both qualitative and quantitative, the purists in both of those fields have an entire vocabulary all of their own, and you'll get exposed to some of that stuff. Just understand that it's the tools of qualitative researchers. It's a tool chest full of tools, and they have specific names for each one of those tools. And the tools of quantitative researchers, they have a tool chest full of tools, and they have specific names for all those tools. So you'll get a little bit of a feel for it. Certainly, you won't get a dose of it. And I'm obviously I'm not going to put it on the final exam unless you want it on your final exam. The articulation of those tools and the familiarity of those tools. And I want you to be exposed to them in this process. I mentioned earlier the final exam. You know exactly what it looks like now. I think you would be foolish not to begin have a document open somewhere that you begin putting those pieces of the final exam together, so that when week 7 gets here and I actually pitch the exam to you, you'll probably have it mostly done. But I know some of you procrastinate a little bit, and you'll wait till week 7 and lose even more sleep than you normally do trying to get that thing done. As I've told you before, when I'm looking through your work and your responses, it reminds me of some books I've read, which you can find on my website. But there were 3 books in particular that came to mind this week that were relevant to some of the comments that you all made in your responses to your learning task. One of them, and I alluded to this earlier, is when I had on my personal growth plan the goal of becoming a better listener and a better questioner. I came across a book by Dorothy Leeds, and she wrote it in 2000, and the title of it was The 7 Powers of Questions, Secrets to Successful Communication in Life and Work. It's very good work, worthy of all school leaders. Another book in relation to the school culture climate thing and the way organizations, basically about organizational behavior, but more specifically about the way you and I view organizations that we're trying to lead. This is a seminal work, by the way, by Bowman and Deal, Bowman, B-O-L-M-A-N, and Deal, D-E-A-L. They wrote it in 1991, but and actually they wrote it from the perspective of education because that's what they specialize in, but I can tell you leaders across all kinds of professions and organizations have read this book. It's called Reframing Organizations, Artistry, Choice, and Leadership. It's good work, very good work. And I mentioned to you earlier Dr. Bass and his work. One of his best books, I think, was one that he wrote with Avolio, Bass and Avolio in '94. And the title of that book was Improving Organizational Effectiveness Through Transformational Leadership. On that thought, actually, that triggered something else. Just now, I thought with me too, because in reading Dr. Bass's work over those years and his conceptions of transformational leadership. By the way, I apologize if I repeat something to you all. I'm hopeful that your memory is as bad as mine. I know it will get there if it's not as bad now. But Dr. Bass made a comment. Let me back up. In his full-scale model of leadership, he breaks leadership into several kinds of styles or compartments, if you will. And the most impactful he calls transformational leadership, and he describes that very thoroughly. And then the next version that's a kind of a step down, if you will, he calls transactional leadership. And you and I have been very accustomed to that. And as parents, those of you that are parents have done a lot of this transactional leadership stuff. Is I'm leading you, and I get you to do what I want you to, either by rewarding you for doing what I want you to do, or I'm punishing you if you don't do what I want you to do. And so that's a skill that parents use quite regularly. It usually quits working when they're teenagers, by the way. And nothing works when they're teenagers. They're just controlled from outer space. And then another version of in Bass's model is he called laissez-faire leadership, in which the leader just drifts along and doesn't do much of anything unless they find something objectionable, and then they react. But anyway, and in Bass's comments about transformational leadership, he made in one of his books, and I think it's this one that I mentioned to you, Improving Organizational Effectiveness Through Transformational Leadership. He made the comment that through his studies, and I mean, he's got a whole string of them, just a prolific researcher, he concluded that by disposition, he felt like women were more naturally transformational in nature than men were. Well, that piqued my interest, and so I put on my growth plan to study prominent women leaders. And so for a couple of 3 years, I read books and watched videos and listened to audio tapes and stuff by prominent women leaders to see what it was they were doing that I thought was, in Bass's terms, so transformational, and what kinds of those behaviors and characteristics and mindsets that I needed to be trying to adopt for myself. So in a sense, I was trying to become more female in my leadership character, if you will. And I think it helped me quite a bit, frankly, particularly in communications, in the area of communications. Okay, I think I've run out of gas on the stuff that I wanted to say to you. Actually, the most important part is for me to answer questions that you have. And so I will, if you'll post the question, or if you want to speak to me out loud. There's not that many of you in the class this evening, so we can have. I didn't count them. My wife will want me to count, but I'm not going to. So questions. Fire away. Sounds like a song.
So this is Aaron.
Aaron, I see your lips moving. I don't hear your voice.
Can you hear me now? No? Okay.
Can I hear you?
All right. I'll type it.
Okay. Thank you. Someone else want to ask me a question? Interestingly enough, I've mentioned to you before, I don't hear all that well. I think about 60% of my hearing is what I can see coming from your lips. So here's Aaron's question. Yeah. Have an open module 3, but you alluded to the final being hinted at. What is alluding to the final? Well, actually, Aaron, it was in the discussion forum, and I actually told you exactly the 3 things that are on the final that's coming at you. I mean, it's the exact words, and then we're practicing for this week's discussion forum. And part of your final is the top part of the final is that you're supposed to articulate for me that the top 10 things that you learned while taking the course. And so our practice in the discussion forum this week is for you to, I think you've had me in class before, haven't you? We did the same thing previously. You're going to articulate the top 3 learnings to date as just practice for the final. Other questions you got? Mary, 3M, triple M, M cubed. I call Mary all kinds of stuff with the 3M. How do I cite a webinar, PowerPoint, and APA? That can be a little bit tricky, Mary. Typically, if you when you do the original search, if I'm giving you the link, which is probably what's generating your question, then it just opens the thing up. My recommendation to you would be to take the title and the author of that thing and post it into a separate URL, a search window, and it will almost always jump you to the URL where that thing comes from. Sometimes on some of those things, you can take your cursor and hover down right along the bottom of the picture. And usually it's on the left corner. And you can hover down there and it'll show you what the URL is on those things like that. Occasionally, you'll just have to look at the author whose name is posted. I try not to give you one where the author doesn't even show up. And you can kind of hunt and peck in a separate search, internet search for the author in that particular. You might find it in conference proceedings. It might be the Librarians Conference in Seattle, Washington in 2017. Usually you can dig around and find it that way. Someone asked what other courses I teach. So far, actually, LSU Shreveport is the 4th place university I've taught for. It sounds like I have a hard time keeping a job. I don't know, maybe not. But I'm assuming you're asking about LSU Shreveport. I have taught in the last year. I've taught professional learning communities. I've taught using data for school improvement. I have taught curriculum instruction for school leaders, and I think I'm on tap to start that one in October again. That's really an ED, not an EDL class, an ED class. So I'm sure I'll have some CNI folks. We've got some CNI folks here, but usually in that class, when I teach that one, it's about half leadership students and about half CNI students. What else? Internship. I've got quite about half of you. I'm monitoring and supervising your internship activity, although that's not an academic course. I'm trying to think. It seemed like there was one other one that I taught. And Dr. Perry tells me that I may be on tap in the spring to be teaching a STEM course, which is fine because I've always been as a school leader, as a principal and a superintendent both. I've always been a kind of an earlier adopter on the technology stuff. And I was blessed. One of the many blessings of my life was one year here in Texas while I was a superintendent. I was awarded by the Texas Computer Educators Association with an award of being Superintendent of the Year with regard to the use of technology innovation in schools. So that was a great blessing. But the list of blessings in my life are so long. We wouldn't have enough time to talk about them all. You don't know anybody more blessed than I am. Other questions you got? Uh-oh, another student. Okay, well, I won't belabor it. You know how to get hold of me, and I'm thankful. I'm always thankful when you all reach out to me. I'll see you on the internet. But you know, you have my email address, and you also if you look on my website, you also have my Google phone number too. So you my daughter last night insisted that I give her the ability through Snapchat to follow me wherever I am on the planet. I didn't realize that function was there. I wish I'd have had it when I had teenage daughters. That'd have been handy to have. Well, let me think about that. I'll ponder that one a little bit. But anyway, I'm so thankful that you all allow me to be part of your learning journey. If you learn from anti-example, I'm the perfect guy for you. I will see you next week, if not before. Use me as you need me. Thanks for being here tonight.